The stars outside the viewport looked peaceful. They always did. Sat in her small cabin on the freighter Grace and watched them shine in the endless dark. She had seen many stars in her 40 years of life. She had seen them from military ships, from prison transports, from hospital windows. Tonight, they looked the same as always, cold and beautiful and very far away. The Grace was a large ship. It carried 847 passengers across the outer drift, a region of space far from the safety of coalition planets. Most passengers were families going to new colony worlds. Some were workers. Some were traders. All of them believed the journey would be safe. The outer drift was dangerous, yes, but the shipping company had promised armed escorts. The escorts never came. Heard the first alarm at midnight. She was not asleep. She rarely slept well anymore. The alarm was sharp and loud, and it meant only one thing: pirates. She moved quickly to the observation deck. Other passengers were already there, pressing against the windows, their faces pale with fear. Outside, she counted 12 ships. They were vessels, ugly and black, covered in weapons and armor. They surrounded the Grace like wolves around a wounded animal. Captain's voice came over the speakers. He was a calm man, maybe 50 years old, with a steady voice that helped people feel safe, but could hear the fear beneath his words. He told everyone to stay calm. He said he was sending a distress signal. He promised that help would come. New help would not come. The nearest coalition ship was 3 days away. They had maybe 3 hours. They boarded the freighter 20 minutes later. Watched from the shadows as they came through the airlocks. They were terrifying creatures. Each one stood 8 feet tall with gray, armored skin and 4 arms that ended in sharp claws. Their faces had no expression. Their eyes were black and empty like holes in the universe. Their leader was even worse. He called himself the Collector, and he was the most famous pirate king in the outer drift. He was larger than the others, nearly 9 feet tall, and he wore a cape made from the skins of his enemies. When he walked onto the ship, the metal floor shook under his weight. Spoke in a voice like breaking rocks. He told everyone to obey and no one would be hurt. He said they were now his property. He said he would sell them or ransom them depending on their value. He laughed when he said this. His warriors laughed too. They began separating the passengers. They pushed people into groups, men in one area, women in another, children somewhere else. Families screamed as they were torn apart. They did not care. To them, humans were just cargo. Stayed quiet, she watched everything. She counted the guards. She studied their weapons. She memorized their movements. This was what she had been trained to do long ago in another life, a life she had tried to leave behind. Near her, a young mother named Bora held her daughter tight. The little girl was maybe 6 years old. Her name was, and she was crying. A warrior walked toward them and grabbed Bora's arm. He tried to pull away. Bora screamed. She begged them to let her stay with her child. She said she would do anything. The warrior did not understand her words, or maybe he did not care. He hit her across the face with the back of his clawed hand. Bora fell to the ground, blood running from her mouth. Moved without thinking. She knelt beside Bora and helped her sit up. The warrior watched them with his empty black eyes. He raised his hand to strike again. Looked up at him. She did not speak. She did not move. She just looked at him with eyes that held no fear. The warrior paused. Something in her gaze made him uncomfortable. He lowered his hand and walked away. Bora grabbed his arm. Her voice was shaking. She asked what they were going to do. She asked how they would survive. Helped her stand. She told her to stay calm. She told her to watch her daughter. She told her to wait. They loaded all the hostages onto transport ships. The journey to station took 6 hours. Sat in the dark hold with hundreds of other prisoners. She listened to people cry. She listened to people pray. She listened to children ask their parents why this was happening. She said nothing, she just waited. Station was an asteroid fortress in unclaimed space. It was ugly and massive, built from stolen ships and scrap metal. It was home to thousands of pirates, criminals, and slaves. They had ruled it for 50 years. No one had ever escaped. The hostages were taken to holding cells deep inside the station. The cells were cold and dirty. There was little food and less water. The guards laughed at the humans and called them weak. They said the Galactic Coalition would never pay the ransom. They said the humans would all be sold to the slave markets. On the first night, an elderly man sat beside. His name was. He was maybe 70 years old with white hair and kind eyes. He had been a passenger on the freighter, traveling to visit his on a colony world. Now he was a prisoner like everyone else. Studied for a long time. Then he leaned close and whispered. He said he recognized the insignia on her jacket. It was hidden under the collar, but he had seen it. Human Special Operations. The most elite soldiers humanity had ever created. Did not answer. Asked if she was still active. She told him she was retired. Looked around at the crying children, the wounded, the afraid. He asked if she was going to do something. Was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at him with those cold, calm eyes. She told him to be patient. She told him to watch. She told him that when the time came, he would know. Then she closed her eyes and leaned back against the wall. Around her, people wept and prayed and despaired, but was not afraid. She was thinking. She was planning. She was remembering all the skills she had tried so hard to forget. The Pirate King had taken 847 hostages. He thought they were helpless. He thought they were weak. He thought they were just cargo to be sold. He did not know that among them was a woman who had once been called the Ghost of Epsilon. He did not know that she had killed more enemies than most soldiers would ever see. He did not know that she had never failed a mission in her entire career. He would learn soon enough. 3 days passed in the cells. Each day was the same. The guards brought food twice, if it could be called food. It was gray paste that tasted like nothing and filled the stomach just enough to keep the prisoners alive. Water came once a day in dirty containers. The prisoners drank it anyway. They had no choice. Used every moment. While others sat and cried, she watched. While others slept, she listened. She learned the guards' names by listening to them talk. She memorized their patrol schedules by counting their footsteps. She studied the walls, the doors, the vents, the lights. She found the weak points. On the second day, she discovered something important. The guards were afraid of something. When they passed a certain corridor, they walked faster. They looked over their shoulders. They whispered to each other in their rough language. Watched carefully. She saw a sign on the wall in writing. She could not read it, but she recognized the symbol. It was a warning, radiation, reactor core nearby. She smiled to herself. Old stations like this always had old reactors. Old reactors were unstable. Unstable reactors could be useful. Captain approached her on the third day. He was a broken man now. His ship had been taken. His passengers were prisoners. He blamed himself for everything. But he was not stupid, and he had noticed that was different from the others. He sat beside her and spoke quietly. He asked who she really was. Told him she was just a passenger. Shook his head. He said he had been a captain for 20 years. He knew how to read people. He said she moved like a soldier. She watched like a hunter. She was the only person in the cell who was not afraid. Studied him for a moment. Then she asked if he wanted to get his passengers home. Said yes. He said he would do anything. She told him to gather some people. She needed a small team. People who were strong. People who could follow orders. People who would not panic. That night, after the guards finished their patrol, sat in the corner of the cell with 4 people. Captain was there. So was a young engineer from the ship. He was maybe 25, thin and nervous, but said he was the engineer on the freighter. There was also the ship's medic, a woman in her 30s with steady hands and calm eyes. And there was Old, who had served in the Coalition Navy long ago and still remembered how to fight. Spoke in a whisper so quiet that even the closest prisoners could not hear. She told them the station had an old reactor. It was in the lower levels, maybe 200 meters from their cell. The reactor was unstable. She could tell from the warning signs and the way the guards avoided that area. Nodded slowly. He said old reactors were dangerous. They used a cooling system that failed often. If the cooling system stopped, the reactor would overheat. If it overheated, alarms would sound all over the station. Asked if he could make that happen without actually destroying the station. Thought about it. He said maybe. If he could reach the maintenance ducts, he could access the cooling controls. He could trigger a false alarm. The reactor would not actually explode, but the alarms would make everyone think it would. Asked what would happen then. Explained. When the alarms went off, the pirates would panic. They would run to escape pods. They would abandon their posts. In that chaos, the guards here would leave. The prisoners could escape to the docking bay and take the transport ships. Asked a simple question. She asked how we'd get to the reactor. The cells were locked. Guards were everywhere. Said she would handle that. Asked how one woman could handle a station full of pirates. Was quiet for a moment. Then she told them something about herself. She told them that before she retired, she worked for Human Special Operations. Her code name was Ghost. She spent 15 years doing things that never appeared in any report. She infiltrated enemy bases alone. She eliminated targets that entire armies could not reach. She survived missions that killed everyone else. The group was silent. They looked at this small, quiet woman with new eyes. Asked why she retired. His face did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. She said she got tired of killing. She wanted to be normal. She wanted to forget what she was. She looked around at the crying children, the wounded, the afraid. She said she could not forget anymore. Asked the question everyone was thinking. She asked if could really fight an entire pirate station alone. Shook her head. She said she would not fight them. Fighting meant fair combat. Fighting meant giving your enemy a chance. She would not give them a chance. She would hunt them. The plan was simple. Tomorrow night, during the late patrol, would disable the cell lock. She had been working on it since day one, using a piece of metal she had hidden in her boot. Once the door was open, she would move through the station alone. She would eliminate guards silently, one by one. She would clear a path to the reactor for. When triggered the alarm, the station would fall into chaos. At that moment, and would lead the prisoners to the docking bay, would care for the wounded. They would take the transport ships and fly to Coalition space. Asked what would happen to. Said she would meet them at the docking bay, but her voice said something different. Her voice said she did not expect to survive. Reached out and put his old hand on her shoulder. He said she did not have to do this alone. He said they could find another way. Looked at him with those cold, calm eyes. But this time, there was something warm beneath the ice. She told him there was no other way. She told him that 847 people were depending on them. She told him that some things were worth dying for. She stood up and walked to her corner of the cell. The conversation was over. That night, while everyone slept, sat in the darkness and thought about her life. She thought about all the people she had killed. She thought about all the missions she had completed. She thought about the day she retired and tried to become normal. She had failed at being normal. She had failed at being peaceful, but maybe she could succeed at this one last thing. Tomorrow, she would become the ghost again. Tomorrow, she would walk into the darkness and show what a human could really do. She closed her eyes and waited for the night to end. The station's night cycle began at midnight. The lights grew dim. The corridors grew quiet. Most of the pirates went to their quarters to sleep or drink or fight among themselves. Only the guards remained on patrol, walking their routes with lazy confidence. They had done this for years. Nothing ever happened at night. Tonight would be different. Waited until the guard passed their cell. She counted his footsteps until they faded. Then she moved to the door. The lock was old technology, strong but simple. She had spent 4 days studying it, testing it, learning its weaknesses. Now she pressed the sharpened metal into the mechanism and twisted. The lock clicked open. She looked back at the prisoners. Most were asleep, was awake, watching her with worried eyes. She gave him a small nod. Then she slipped through the door and disappeared into the darkness. The corridor was cold and dim. Red emergency lights cast long shadows on the metal walls, moved without sound, her feet touching the ground so softly that even she could barely hear them. This was how she had been trained. This was what she was made for. The first guard was 20 meters ahead. He was young for a maybe only 50 years old, which meant he was careless. He stood at his post, playing with a small device in his upper hands while his lower hands rested on his weapons. He never looked up. Approach from behind. She knew exactly where to strike. They had armored skin, but they had weak points. The base of the skull, the joints of the arms, the soft tissue under the jaw. Human scientists had studied their anatomy for decades. Human special operations had learned how to kill them. She struck once. The guard collapsed without a sound. Took his sidearm and his blade. The gun was too large for her human hands, but she could make it work. The blade was heavy and curved, designed for claws. It felt strange in her grip, but a weapon was a weapon. She moved on. The next 2 hours were like a nightmare for the guards. Disappeared from their posts. Patrols went out and never came back. Bodies were found in dark corners, killed by precise strikes to their weak points. No one saw the attacker. No one heard anything. It was as if a ghost was moving through the station. The pirates began to panic. They sent search teams into the corridors. The search teams found nothing. Some of them did not return at all. Used the station against them. She learned the layout as she moved, memorizing every turn, every door, every vent. She found the control room for the internal systems and used it to her advantage. She vented airlocks in empty sections, creating loud alarms that drew guards away from her path. She shut off lights in corridors, then waited in the darkness for her prey to come to her. By the 3rd hour, she had eliminated 17 guards. The station was in chaos. Pirates ran through the corridors with their weapons drawn, shooting at shadows. They screamed at each other in their harsh language. Some of them refused to leave their quarters. Some of them tried to flee in escape pods. Word reached the collector in his throne room. His lieutenant told him that something was killing their warriors. Something fast, something invisible, something that could not be stopped. Laughed. He said it was probably just a malfunction in the systems. He said his warriors were cowards who were afraid of the dark. His lieutenant did not laugh. He said the bodies were real. He said the dead guards had been killed by someone who knew exactly how to kill. He said the wounds were precise, professional. Stopped laughing. He ordered 50 of his best warriors to sweep the station. He ordered them to find this killer and bring them to him alive. He wanted to see what kind of creature could cause such fear. The 50 warriors spread through the station. They were the Dread Claws, veterans of 100 raids, killers who had never known defeat. They moved in groups of 5, covering each other, watching every shadow. Watched them from the darkness. She counted them. She studied their formation. She found their weaknesses. Then she began. The first group died in a maintenance tunnel. She dropped from the ceiling vent, killed 2 before they could react, and vanished before the others could aim their weapons. The second group died in a storage room. She led them inside with false sounds, then sealed the door and vented the atmosphere. The third group died one by one as they searched a dark corridor, each warrior falling to a silent strike from the shadows. The remaining warriors gathered together. They refused to separate. They pointed their weapons at every shadow, every vent, every door. Their hands were shaking. These were the Dread Claws, the most feared warriors in the outer drift, but now they were afraid. Did not attack them directly. She did not need to. She simply followed them, staying just out of sight, letting them hear her footsteps now and then. She let them shoot at empty corridors. She let them scream at nothing. She let their fear grow. After an hour, 20 of them refused to continue. They dropped their weapons and walked back to the main hall. They said they would rather face anger than face the ghost in the darkness. The remaining 30 kept searching. They found nothing. They lost 10 more warriors to traps and ambushes. Finally, with only 20 left, their commander called off the hunt. He led his surviving warriors back to the throne room to report their failure. Was not laughing anymore. He stood at the viewport looking out at the stars. His lieutenant stood beside him, silent and afraid. The Pirate King asked what could do this. He asked what kind of creature could kill 30 of his best warriors alone. His lieutenant answered quietly. He said the wounds on the bodies were strange. The strikes were precise but weak. A strong creature would have torn the guards apart. This killer was not strong. This killer was small. He said he thought it was a human. Turned to look at him. His black eyes were cold with rage. He said that was impossible. He said humans were weak, soft, fragile. A human could not kill warriors. His lieutenant did not argue, but he did not agree either. Deep in the station, reached the reactor level. The corridor was empty now. The guards had all fled or died. She found the maintenance duct that had described and marked it with a small scratch. Then she sat down in the shadows and waited. She was tired. Her body hurt. Her hands were covered in blood that was not her own. But she was not finished. The path to the reactor was clear. Now she needed to clear the path to the docking bay, and then she needed to face the Pirate King himself. She closed her eyes for a moment and breathed slowly. She thought about the 847 people waiting in that cell. She thought about Little, who reminded her of a daughter she never had. She thought about Bora, who loved her child more than her own life. She thought about Old, who had put his hand on her shoulder and told her she did not have to do this alone. She opened her eyes. The cold calm was back. She stood up and walked into the darkness. The hunt was not over yet. Returned to the cell before dawn. She moved through the corridors like a shadow, passing the bodies of fallen guards, stepping over pools of dark blood. The station was quiet now. The pirates who survived were hiding in their quarters, afraid to come out. The hunters had become the hunted. She opened the cell door and slipped inside. The prisoners were awake, sitting in nervous clusters, whispering to each other. They had heard the alarms. They had heard the distant sounds of gunfire and screaming. They did not know what was happening, but they knew something had changed. Saw her first. His eyes went wide. She was covered in blood and dirt. Her clothes were torn, but her eyes were the same as before, cold, calm, focused. She walked to the corner where her team waited, looked pale and scared, looked determined, looked proud. Spoke quickly. She told the path to the reactor was clear. She had marked the maintenance duct he needed. She told him to go now, while the pirates were confused and afraid. She told him to wait for her signal before triggering the alarm. Asked what the signal would be. Said he would know when he heard it. The whole station would know. Nodded. He was terrified, but he did not argue. He slipped out of the cell and disappeared into the corridor. Turned to and she told them to prepare the prisoners. When the alarm sounded, they would have maybe 10 minutes before the pirates realized it was a false alarm. In that time, they needed to reach the docking bay and take the transport ships. Asked about the guards at the docking bay. Said there would be no guards, she would handle them. Asked what was going to do next. Looked at her with those cold eyes. She said she was going to meet the Pirate King. The walk to the throne room took 20 minutes. Did not hurry. She walked through the empty corridors with steady steps, her stolen blade in one hand and the sidearm in the other. She passed frightened pirates who pressed themselves against the walls and refused to look at her. She passed locked doors behind which she could hear whispered prayers in alien languages. The Pirate King's throne room was at the heart of the station. It was a massive chamber built from the hulls of destroyed ships, decorated with the treasures of 1,000 raids. Gold and jewels covered the walls. Weapons hung from the ceiling like trophies. And in the center, on a throne made from the bones of his enemies, sat the Collector. He was even larger than remembered. 9 feet of muscle and armor, with 4 massive arms and black eyes that held nothing but cold hunger. His dread claws stood around him, the survivors of the hunt, maybe 15 warriors with weapons ready and hatred in their eyes. Walked into the chamber alone. She stopped 20 meters from the throne and looked up at the Pirate King. Studied her in silence. She was small, thin, covered in blood and exhaustion. She did not look like a warrior. She looked like a tired human woman who had somehow wandered into the wrong place. Then he looked at her eyes, and he saw something that made him pause. He spoke in a voice like grinding stones. He asked if she was the one who had killed his warriors. Said yes. He asked how. He said she was just a human. Humans were weak, fragile prey. Did not answer. She just looked at him with those cold, empty eyes. Leaned forward on his throne. He said he was impressed. He said he had ruled the outer drift for 50 years. He had killed thousands of enemies. He had built an empire of blood and fear. And in all that time, no one had ever attacked his station alone. No one had ever killed so many of his warriors in a single night. He asked what she wanted. He asked if she wanted to die. Shook her head. She said she did not want to die. She said she wanted to make a deal. Laughed. It was a horrible sound, like rocks falling into a dark pit. He asked what kind of deal a prey animal could offer a predator. Reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device. It was a dead man's switch, a trigger connected to the station's reactor. Had built it from parts he found in the maintenance ducts. If her grip loosened for even a second, the reactor would overload and destroy the entire station. The dread claws raised their weapons, raised his hand to stop them. Explained the device. She said the reactor was already unstable, was standing by, ready to begin the overload sequence. If killed her or if she chose to release the switch, the station would explode. Everyone would die. The prisoners, the pirates, himself. Everything he had built for 50 years would be gone in a flash of nuclear fire. His eyes narrowed. He asked if she was bluffing. Said no. She said she had already accepted death. She said her life meant nothing compared to the lives of the 847 people in his cells. She said she would gladly die if it meant taking him with her. The throne room was silent. The dread claws looked at each other nervously. They could see the truth in her eyes. This woman was not afraid. This woman was not bluffing. This woman would kill everyone in the station, including herself, without hesitation. Stared at her for a long moment. Then he leaned back on his throne and spoke. He asked what she wanted. Gave him her terms. She wanted all 847 hostages released. She wanted them loaded onto the transport ships and allowed to leave the station. She wanted safe passage to Coalition space. In exchange, she would not destroy the station. Asked what happened after the hostages left. He asked if she would still destroy the station. Said no. She said she was not a murderer. She said once the hostages were safe, she would leave the switch behind and go with them. He could keep his station. He could keep his empire, but he would never take human hostages again. Was quiet. His advisors whispered to him in their harsh language. Some of them wanted to attack to take the risk. Others were afraid. The woman's eyes were too calm. Her hand was too steady. Finally spoke. He said he agreed. One of the dread claws protested. He said they could not trust a human. He said this was a trick. Silenced him with a look. Then he turned back to and spoke in a low voice. He said he had collected many things in his long life. Treasures, weapons, slaves, planets. He had collected things that entire armies could not take from him, but he had never collected something that could not be broken. He said this woman could not be broken. He ordered his warriors to release the hostages. He ordered them to prepare the transport ships. He ordered them to give the humans safe passage. The dread claws obeyed. They did not like it. They did not understand it. But they feared their king, and their king had made his decision. Stood in the throne room with the dead man's switch in her hand. She did not move. She did not blink. She watched the pirates carry out her orders, and she waited. The pirate king watched her from his throne. He said nothing, but his black eyes never left her face. He was trying to understand. He was trying to comprehend how one small human could do what she had done, how she could kill his warriors, how she could face him without fear, how she could hold the fate of his entire empire in her hand and never tremble. He did not understand. He would never understand. That was why humans were dangerous. That was why they should never be underestimated. The hostages were being released. The plan was working. Now came the hardest part, getting out alive. The docking bay was chaos. Pirates ran everywhere, shouting orders, loading prisoners onto transport ships, checking systems and fuel levels. They moved quickly, driven by fear. Somewhere in the station, a human woman held their fates in her hand. They wanted these hostages gone. They wanted this nightmare to end. Stood at the entrance to the docking bay, watching everything. The dead man's switch was still tight in her grip. Two dread claws stood behind her, ordered by to escort her and make sure she did not change her mind. They kept their distance. They had seen what she could do. The prisoners filed past her in long lines. Many of them did not know what had happened. They only knew that suddenly the cell doors had opened and the pirates were pushing them toward the ships. Some thought it was a trick. Some thought they were being taken to slave markets. Some were too afraid to think at all. Old walked near the front of the line. When he passed, he stopped and looked at her. His eyes were wet with tears. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He simply bowed his head, a gesture of deep respect, and continued walking. Came next, supporting a wounded man who could barely stand. She looked at with amazement and gratitude. She whispered two words, "Thank you." Then she helped the wounded man onto the ship. Captain came with the last group. He was counting passengers, making sure no one was left behind. When he reached, he asked about. Pointed to the far end of the docking bay. Was there, sitting against a wall, exhausted but alive. He had finished his work at the reactor and made his way to the ships, nodded and went to help him aboard. Bora was one of the last to leave the cells. She carried Little in her arms, holding her daughter so tight that the child could barely breathe, was not crying anymore. She was looking around with wide, confused eyes, not understanding any of this. When Bora saw, she stopped walking. She stared at this blood-covered woman who had saved them all. She did not have words for what she felt: fear, gratitude, awe, all of these and more. Looked at, the little girl looked back at her with innocent eyes. Spoke softly. She told Bora to take her daughter and go. She told her to give a good life. She told her to teach her to be strong but also kind. She told her that the galaxy needed more kindness. Bora nodded, tears streaming down her face. She said she would never forget. Then she turned and carried her daughter onto the ship. The docking bay was almost empty now. Only a few prisoners remained, being helped onto the last transport. Counted them. 846 people. One was missing. She asked where the last one was. One of the dread claws answered. He said an old woman had died in the cells last night. She was sick before they took the ship. The stress had killed her. Closed her eyes for a moment. 847 hostages. 846 would go home. One would not. She had failed that one. She would carry that failure forever. She opened her eyes and nodded. There was nothing she could do for the dead. The last transport ship was ready. Its engines hummed with power. Inside, 846 humans waited to go home. Lieutenant approached. He was a massive with scars covering his face, a veteran of countless battles, but his voice was respectful when he spoke. He said the ships were ready. He said the humans could leave, but he asked what would happen to the switch. Explained she would board the last ship. When the ship was far enough from the station, she would disable the switch. The reactor would return to normal. Everyone would survive. The lieutenant asked how they could trust her. Almost smiled. She said they could not trust her, just like she could not trust them, but she had given her word. She did not break her word. The lieutenant studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Walked across the docking bay toward the last ship. Every step felt heavy. Her body was exhausted. She had been awake for almost 2 days. She had fought and killed and walked through darkness. Now she just wanted to rest. She reached the ship's ramp and paused. The prisoners inside watched her through the windows. Bora and Little, all of them waiting for her. She turned and looked back at the station one last time. Stood at the viewport of his throne room watching the docking bay. She could not see his face from this distance, but she knew he was there, watching, wondering. She raised her hand in a small gesture. Not a wave, not a salute, just a simple acknowledgement, one warrior to another. Then she turned and walked onto the ship. The transport launched 5 minutes later. The other ships had already left, forming a small convoy that flew toward Coalition space. Sat in the back of the ship, away from the others, watching through the rear viewport as station grew smaller and smaller. When they were 1,000 kilometers away, she disabled the switch. The reactor alarm stopped. The station did not explode. She kept her word. The convoy traveled for 3 days. The transport ships were not fast, and Coalition space was far. But they made it. On the morning of the 3rd day, they passed the Coalition border and were met by a fleet of rescue ships. The hostages were taken to a medical station for treatment. Doctors examined them. Counselors talked to them. Officials asked questions about what had happened. Slipped away before anyone could question her. She found a quiet corner of the station, sat down, and finally allowed herself to rest. Found her an hour later. He sat beside her and said nothing for a long time. They just watched the stars together. Finally he spoke. He asked what she would do now. Said she did not know. She said she had tried to retire. She had tried to be normal. It did not work. Smiled gently. He said maybe she was not meant to be normal. He said maybe she was meant to do things like this. Save people. Protect the weak. Be the ghost that monsters feared. Considered this. Then she shook her head slowly. She said she was tired of being a ghost. She said she wanted to be a person again. She said she wanted to have a life, not just a mission. Nodded, he understood. He asked if she would at least stay in touch. He said his would want to meet the woman who saved their grandfather. Almost smiled. She said maybe. Then she stood up and walked away. No one saw her leave the station. No one knew where she went. But the story spread. It spread from the survivors to their families, from the medical station to the news networks, from colony to colony and world to world. The story of the pirate king who seized hostages and the human woman who walked in alone and walked out with all of them. In the taverns and trading posts of the outer drift, aliens whispered about it. They said humans were strange creatures, small and weak but impossible to break. They said if you took human hostages, a ghost would come for you in the night. They said the pirate king himself was afraid to attack human ships now. The collector never spoke of that night publicly, but his crew said he changed after that. He still raided ships, he still collected treasures, but he never took human prisoners again. Sometimes, late at night, he would stand at the viewport of his throne room and look at the stars. He would remember the woman with the cold eyes and the steady hand. He would remember how she had walked into his domain alone and walked out with everything he had taken. And he would feel something he had not felt in 50 years. Respect. In a small apartment on a quiet colony world, far from the outer drift, a woman named sat by her window and watched the sunset. She had a cup of tea in her hands and a book in her lap. She was trying to be normal again. She did not know if she would succeed. She did not know if the ghosts of her past would ever leave her alone. She did not know if she would ever be called to fight again. But for now she was at peace. For now she was home. And somewhere out in the galaxy, 846 people were living their lives because of what she had done, was learning to read. Bora was teaching her daughter to be strong, was designing new engines, was healing the sick, was playing with was captaining a new ship. They would never forget her. And neither would the monsters who ruled the darkness. The Pirate King seized hostages. She walked in alone. She walked out with all.